On the morning of April 26th, 1865, a photographer in Helena, Arkansas, looked out at the Mississippi and saw something that made him run for his camera. A steamboat licensed to carry 376 souls, carrying more than 2,000. The decks were so crowded that when the men saw the camera and pressed to the rail, the whole boat began to lean toward the lens, and the crew shouted them back from the edge. He took one picture. It is the only one that exists. Nearly every man in it had just survived the most lethal prison camps in American history. Nearly every man in it believed, for the first time in years, that he was safe. Look at them once more. In 19 hours, most of the people in this photograph will be in the river. This is the story of the worst maritime disaster in American history, and the reason you have never heard of it is a story too. Andersonville was a rectangle of Georgia clay where 13,000 men died, not of bullets, but of hunger and water and time. The men who walked out of its gates in April 1865 had beaten odds no soldier should ever be given. They had survived the war. They had survived the peace. There was exactly one thing left in the world that could kill them, and it was the ride home. They came from the same church pews and the same creek valleys. They had been captured together, imprisoned together, freed together. On the Sultana they slept side by side the way they had their whole lives. Whole neighborhoods were on that deck. Remember that. It matters later. The government paid steamboat operators by the head, $5 per enlisted man, 10 per officer. Testimony before the official inquiries described an arrangement between the Sultana's captain, J. Cass Mason, and the Vicksburg quartermaster's office under Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Hatch, a man whose own record was already stained with corruption charges, to steer the entire prisoner shipment onto one boat. Do the arithmetic the quartermaster did. 2,000 men at $5 a head is $10,000, a fortune in 1865, sailing on a single hull. Other boats stood at the same dock with the same empty decks and watched the prisoners file past them, hour after hour, onto a ship that was already full. 10,000 reasons, walking up one gangplank. One of the Sultana's 4 boilers was leaking. The mechanic who opened it, R.G. Taylor, testified he told the captain the bulged plate had to come out, and that he refused to continue until Mason promised a full repair at St. Louis. The full job meant days at the dock. Days at the dock meant losing the contract. A thinner patch was riveted over the bulge in a single day. Every disaster has a moment when it can still be stopped. This one had 2, the contract and the patch, and they were decided in the same 48 hours, by the same handful of men, within a mile of each other. Both decisions ended the same way. The boat left on time. And Captain Mason, who made the deal, boarded her too. The river does not read contracts. She made 7 miles an hour against a river that wanted her back. Below decks, 4 boilers ran at the edge of their strength, sharing water unevenly every time the top-heavy boat rolled, starving one boiler, flooding another, heat surging through metal that was already tired. And over the weakest point of the weakest boiler, a patch of thinner steel, hammered on in an afternoon. They crowded the rail, because being in a photograph meant something in 1865. Proof for the people at home that you were real, and alive, and coming. The boat leaned. The crew shouted. The shutter opened. Of all the faces pressed into this frame, wanting to be remembered, history would spend a century trying to forget every one of them. At midnight, she crosses to the Arkansas side, takes on 1,000 bushels of coal, and turns north into the dark. 3 of the 4 boilers exploded 7 miles north of Memphis, in the dark, in flood current, in April cold water. The boat burned to the waterline. The men in the river were the least able men in America to be there. Half-starved, exhausted, most unable to swim, in a channel that was no longer a river, but a cold inland sea with no banks to reach. The nearest shore was not a shore. A flood had erased the banks. A man swimming in the dark would find where land should be, the tops of drowned trees. And so that is where the survivors were found at dawn, clinging to treetops in the middle of the Mississippi. Dozens of them scattered across miles of water, calling to each other in the dark to stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. The southbound steamer Sultana came around the bend an hour later, onto a river on fire. Her crew tore the doors off their own staterooms and threw them overboard for the men to hold. They threw hay bales. They threw anything that floated. Memphis woke to voices drifting past the waterfront and sent out everything with a hull: Navy cutters, coal barges, rowboats, and kept going out until the sun rose on what was left. The toll: 1,169 recorded dead, a greater share of those aboard than the Titanic, and the deadliest maritime disaster in American history. Captain Mason, who made the deal, died with his boat. Hundreds of his passengers were buried at Memphis National Cemetery, under stones that say only "unknown." Men who had survived 400 days of Andersonville drowned 13 days after the war ended, 7 miles short of a city, on their way home. If you write that in a novel, the editor cuts it. Too cruel, too neat. The river didn't have an editor. The inquiries dissolved without a single conviction. Hatch ignored summons after summons and never testified at all. Here is the cruelest arithmetic of April 1865. The Sultana's dead outnumbered the dead of the Titanic, and lost the front page to a single man in a Virginia barn. The story didn't break, it sank. No one was punished. No monument rose in Washington. The country simply turned the page, and the page never turned back. The survivors refused the verdict. They organized in the 1880s, a Northern association and a Southern one. The Southern men gathering each April in Knoxville, home of the 3rd Tennessee's dead. Every year, on the anniversary, they answered a roll call and told the story to anyone who would listen. In 1916, after decades of petitioning a government that would not build them a memorial, the Knoxville survivors, old men now, raised their own. A plinth of Tennessee marble on a hilltop at Mount Olive Baptist Church Cemetery, cut with 365 Tennessee names and a carving of the boat herself, paid for out of their own pockets. Think about what that monument is. Not a nation honoring its dead. The drowned men's own friends in their 70s, buying marble with farmers' savings because Washington wouldn't. They put it on the highest hill they could find, as if altitude could argue with forgetting. April 1930. The Knoxville reunion convenes as it has for 4 decades. One survivor comes. Pleasant M. Keeble, 84 years old, Company H, 3rd Tennessee Cavalry. The man who had served for years as the association's scribe, keeper of its minutes. He climbed the hill alone. The man who had written the minutes of their meetings for 40 years opened the log one last time and read it aloud to an empty room, the roll of all the men who used to answer. When he finished, he decided the tradition would end with him. He closed the book, and he walked back down the hill. 1888. At the survivors' own monument, descendants and strangers found a new association. The April meetings resume and continue to this day. A museum rises near the wreck site in Marion, Arkansas, because the Mississippi itself moved in the years since, and the Sultana's bones now lie under an Arkansas farm field, a shipwreck buried in dry land. Even the river tried to leave. It walked 2 miles west and left her grave behind, under soybeans, under Arkansas, under 120 years of quiet. The clock on this story ran for 53 hours, and then for 65 years, and then it stopped, in an empty room in Knoxville, with the closing of a book. It took the grandchildren of the drowned to open it again. This film is one more reading of the minutes.